Hey guys, Professor Bill, Comic Book University, and Captain America issue number 1 from IDW Comics. This is the Marvel imprint, licensed for IDW through IDW and all that good stuff. This is supposed to be a book mostly for kids. I don't see it as necessarily being great for kids. I mean, depending on what age you're talking about. If you're talking about junior high, yeah, sure, I guess. The problem is the book is very chauvinistic. Maybe not even very chauvinistic, but how do you level that? And I'm going to get more into that. I'm going to get into why I think the book is that way. But first, let's actually talk about who made the comic book, all right? There are 4 stories in here: Spy for the Cameras and If This Be Prodoc. Those stories are written by Roger Landridge. 2 other stories, The Legend Reborn and Web of Deceit. Those are written by Scott Gray. Craig Rousseau drew the first 3 stories. Pencils for the final story, Web of Deceit, were by Matteo Lally, and Christian Vecchia did the inks for that final story. All the colors for all 4 of the stories were done by Sotocolor, and Dave Sharp did all of the lettering. This beautiful cover was by Clayton Henrym and Guru FX, and Captain America was created by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. After I read the entire comic book, I went back to look at who made the book. That's a typical thing that I do so that I don't prejudge a comic book. And I'm very glad because I looked and I saw that the original consulting editor is Ralph Macchio. Haven't been a fan of anything that Ralph Macchio has done in a while. When I saw that he started, writing one-shots here and there again, I was really excited for it because I remember a lot of his stories being pretty good. I just don't see that anymore. I see that he just does a bunch of throwaway stories that never really mean anything. They don't go anywhere. And it doesn't seem like Marvel really even cares because they don't usually put great, artists with him either. Having him being consulting editor on this, I think the comic was doomed from the beginning. I don't see Ralph Macchio as having a current, strong vision for any of the characters that I've seen him write. So I just don't see how he's going to consult in a good way for these stories. I know that sounds mean, but I gotta shoot from the hip on this. Just it is what it is, man. He's got his way, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who love his work. I am simply not one of that crowd. I don't like what Ralph Macchio does. None of his stories ever really rub off on me in a good way. I see this comic book as it was kind of written for kids, but with the chauvinistic aspects in here. I'm going to give you one example. At the very end of the first story, Captain America says to a recurring female journalist, maybe you should take up sewing. If somebody said that today, you'd get slapped in the face. Now, I don't want to get too deep into this. Oh, and you would deserve it too. I don't want to get too deep into this. I've got a podcast that I do live every Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Anybody is welcome to come there. It is an Ask Me Anything. It doesn't even have to be about comic books. I will talk about pretty much anything. You can ask me anything. Will I answer everything? Not necessarily, but I don't think I've ever not answered anything yet. So I'm more than happy to talk in more depth on this. But for here, listen, if I go and I read a comic book from 1942 about Captain America, Joe Simon, Jack Kirby, and maybe, drawn by Alan Bellman, anybody, if I see one of those stories back then, I expect there to be some chauvinistic nonsense in there. I expect there to be some racism in there. I'm saying? I don't look forward to it, but I expect it because that's the time. Captain America is supposed to be the best of us, but he's not written by the best of us. He's written by normal human beings. Best of us, worst of us, I don't care to get into that nonsense. You know what I'm saying? Back then, when you have somebody called, let's say a Jap bastard, that's not something that you usually want to, calling a German a kraut. That's just not something that we say today. That's not the kind of things that's in our vocabulary today. I mean, unless you're absolute scum, so I don't expect to see things like that. That didn't happen in this comic book. I don't want anybody to be confused by this. What happened in this comic book was the thing I just said. And there were other things also less than the kraut Jap bastard thing. You know what I'm saying? So when they're written back during that time, I expect to see things like that because that's the world that we were in, and it's regular humans writing the greatest human who's ever, been written, right? But if you write a comic book in 2019, I don't care what year you're placing the comic book is written in 2019. Captain America is supposed to be better than us, okay? I am all for laughing at kids, I don't care if you call them millennials or next gens or whatever you want to call them, I am all for laughing at anybody who wants to try and judge me, a person who, while I understand the internet, hell, I helped to make wireless internet. Ask me anything, Saturdays, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I don't frequent the internet like the kids of today do. And yes, that's anybody who's under 30. I will call you a kid. Just you will too when you get to be 44 years older or older. Yeah, no. But the fact is that, you know, although I don't necessarily understand all the language and all the forbidden words that we're not supposed to use nowadays, I do understand sexism when I see it. I do understand racism when I see it. The virtue signaling, I don't understand. I swear to God, I will never understand how this means anything other than okay. I just saw today that Chris Pratt got attacked for having "Don't Tread on Me." I've had on my Facebook where it says, "What's your religion?" Since I first got on Facebook in, what was that? Mid-2000s, maybe earlier. I think earlier than the mid-2000s. I think it was before, whatever. Like the year after Facebook came out, I made a Facebook account. And even in MySpace, you know, my religion was "Don't tread on me." Don't tread on me is, it doesn't mean some racist nonsense. You know what I'm saying? If you're a racist and you're virtue signaling using things like that, you're scum. Because you're making people like me look like a bad guy, because I still think that something like this means okay. So yeah, nonsense like that, you're out of there. And at the same time, if you're a non-racist kid, but you're going to pull some SJW platforming and try and call me out because I think that this still means okay, well then you're scum also. You're also an ignoramus, so you're kind of worse in some ways. Anyway, all that being said, this comic book, when you tell a woman maybe you should take up sewing instead of doing a career like, if a woman wants to sew, she can sew. If a man wants to sew, he can sew. If anybody wants to sew, they can sew. But if they're doing another job and you tell somebody take up sewing and they're a woman, this means something. This means something. Writing Captain America like a chauvinist and saying, oh, well, it's 1942. No. My Captain America is not a chauvinist. Not in any time period. Not by any measurement. You write something in 2019 where Captain America says, okay, USA, and then somebody in, you know, freaking 2040 wants to say, oh, well, that symbol means, you know, let's not even use that symbol. This, okay? This means, you know, good job. My kids do. Good job. If somebody writes something like that, and in 2040 suddenly this means white power, well, then we've got a problem. We shouldn't write Captain America doing something like that then. But for now, Captain America could do this. Back then, Captain America could say take up sewing. Today, Captain America can't say take up sewing. I would just think that things like this are common sense. But then again, I also see some of the things that Ralph Macchio consults on or writes himself. Maybe I'm completely wrong in this. Maybe he had nothing to do with this whatsoever. Maybe it's everybody else who should be blamed for this comic book. But when I see a consistent theme all throughout, the only people who are consistent on the book, according to the book's own titles, are the colors and the letters and the consultant. You know where I'm going to kind of put my money on. So, look, I could be wrong. I'm wrong lots of times. In this particular case, maybe I'm wrong also. But Captain America doesn't say things like that. My Captain America is better than that. So no, just that saying and many other things that happened in this comic book, not a fan of. Simply not a fan. You don't write things like that in 2019. I don't care when you place the book. I know when the book was actually written. Anyway, guys, I'm done. Professor Bill, Comic Book University. Class dismissed.